So I thought we'd start with a wee quick look at some of the problems that I've come across in schools. And for me, one of the biggest problems is that we group kids chronologically. So there's usually a really wide range of ability in any one class, and ages can span almost 18 months. And I think also curriculum for excellence and the measuring of attainment means that we often compare children with peers, and the developmental progress and the time that children take to progress through certain things really does vary. Many neurodiverse brains work differently, and they don't naturally survive in a traditional classroom. They often require a more flexible approach and can benefit from the supports that we will talk about shortly. But they also need more time for a variety of reasons. So I think about my child and the things that have happened to her in her life that maybe require a little bit of processing and a little bit of repair. And she's sitting in a class with other people who haven't had those same experiences and maybe don't have to do the same kind of thinking about things that she does. So, and again, also depending on your experiences in life and how mature you are, you might not be able to appreciate the themes that the class are studying. So again, I remember, my child looking at Second World War at a time when they really weren't developmentally at that stage to take those conversations on board. And I'm really conscious too that sometimes if we focus on the comparison with peers, then it can stop us from seeing all the positives and the strengths of a child. So there's a really big focus, I think, within support for learning and within schools generally to try to change that discussion so that we do focus more on strengths and not the part that needs to be developed. We're looking for a more balanced approach. Children can take longer to achieve emotional regulation too, especially when there's a neurodevelopmental condition or where a threat response is overstimulated. And we need every child to be able to flourish, including those whose personal and emotional development needs a little bit of extra time. And our schools are definitely stronger when every child has got what they need to be healthy and to thrive. And we really need to work together to do that. And we also know that when parents and teachers work together and children are well supported, that is when there's a lot of success and when children thrive in school. If we can give the right support at the right time, we've got a really strong foundation for our children's learning. We know that there's a gap here and that a lot of the families that come through on the helpline don't feel supported. And when there's that staff lack of knowledge of trauma and a lack of, I suppose, a deeper understanding of trauma or that understanding of FASD, or we're not open to listening and learning from parents, then that's when children's progress is kind of suffers. And the good news is that there are lots of people and organisations working to improve this, and it is a national priority, and there are programmes and training taking place in schools at the moment, but it does take time to embed change. And the school system was built with the masses in mind, and we are still working with that legacy. So some of us are still working in Victorian buildings, and neurotypical learners are the majority. So if the curriculum centres on neurotypical children, then that's something that needs to be changed. And there are more and more children that are coming through with neurodiverse learning profiles. So these young people are coming through, they're passionate about change. So we've got autistic, care experienced or LGBTQ young people who are speaking out and saying, this is what really works for me, and this is what I don't like about school, this is what's not working. And because we're embracing a rights-based approach, change is happening in schools. But if a school's not moving fast enough there, and the young person struggles to be their authentic self in school, that's when you see the Coke can effect at home. And all children need to feel safe, cared for, and have a sense of belonging, to have to be in the optimum place for learning. And when they don't feel those things and they feel under threat, they mask their behaviour, or they act out, or they just go for compliance. And if we focus on children's behaviour rather than what's going on behind that, then we miss an opportunity to support their learning. If a child is struggling to cope with a cognitive learning load in class, then they can be overwhelmed, withdrawn, or act out. So if that's your child, the first point of call would be to talk to somebody like me in school, to look for the support for learning teacher, or to look for the deputy head and ask them to take a closer look at what's going on. And of course, I won't go into too much about the lack of time and resources, but it's huge for teachers. You know, there's only so many minutes in a day, and also for parents, there's a lack of time there too. In terms of the additional supports that we can have, the ASN legislation, the additional support needs legislation, requires schools to make reasonable adjustments for people with additional support needs. But the law doesn't say how much or what type of support each learner should get. Instead, it says the support needs to be adequate and efficient, and it's based on individual needs. So what reasonable adjustments, adequate and efficient means is debatable. It's going to mean something slightly different to different people. It's possible, it's possible that you will see that differently to teachers, and that teachers will see it differently too. And we often see that if we think about people who assume that support might be one-to-one support for a child, and really it covers anything that you do to help a child who needs extra support with their learning. And it can also be something that's really short term, that happens just once or twice or for a small block, or it's something that maybe you do more regularly. So in terms of the support that might be on offer for learning and teaching, we've got things like using particular approaches. So teachers might use social stories to teach us a concept about friendship, or a concept about a social rule that's maybe that's less accessible to some children. They might use specific reading schemes for dyslexic children, or a specific phonic programme. They might introduce a programme like Zones of Regulation, which teaches social and emotional regulation, really, and they might do that across the whole school to support children's development. They might just be much more mindful about the language that they use, because they've got children who take things literally. So you stop trying to speak in metaphors, you're much more clear. You might give extra time. You might buddy somebody up in the playground or in a class to make sure that they've got a little bit of extra support beside them. It might be that you look for support from outside of the classroom. So you ask an educational psychologist to come and observe and give a bit of advice, or you get advice from speech and language. And those specialist people will come in, they'll advise the class teacher, and then the class teacher really is the one who then carries out any intervention or programme that they put into place to provide support. And very often it will be things like break down the instructions, use visuals to support it, show children an example of what a successful one looks like, and you might scaffold the work that they do might start off by asking them to just do a little bit, and then their task is finished, and then gradually kind of reduce the supports that you provide. It might be that a support for learning teacher goes into a class and teaches a class with a child, and that's a teacher teaches a class with the other teacher, and that's a way of providing support for the teacher and upskilling the teacher to consider the needs of children and do things in a different way. So there's a whole kind of host of options that you might have in terms of providing support. You might also do things like give out resources. So you might give out a tablet for children to be able to use different apps. You might give out coloured overlays or headphones or ear defenders, so different types of equipment, even wobble cushions, different types of furniture to sit on, a quieter room. So there's all sorts of things that come under additional supports. There's no one definition. And the thing to bear in mind is that at the end of the day, it's the child that's being supported. And because each child is different, they're going to need different approaches. So one dyslexic child really likes coming out of a class in a small group or one-to-one support. And for another child, that's awful. And it's the thing that turns them off school. They would rather be with everybody else. And as teachers, we have to try to kind of find that balance. And I think also context is important. So those terms, reasonable, efficient, and adequate, because they vary, they might vary because of the number of pupils in a school, the type of need that you've got in a class, or the building or the location. And also at the moment, I would say staff absence is a really big factor as well. And in my case, it's the actual physical building. The Victorian building doesn't lend itself to all the kind of breakout spaces that we would like to be able to offer. So we often have to find ourselves thinking really very creatively. So if you're looking to initiate support in a primary school, the first thing to do would be to talk to the class teacher. Most additional support needs are supported by the class teacher. And if the problem can't be solved there, then you would go and speak to the support for learning teacher, the deputy head, and they might be able to put support in place for you. And I think I've already said that support for learning teachers would take a closer look if there was a problem and look for a way to take things forward. And if your issue is a kind of, I suppose, bigger than a classroom-based issue, and it's more a social and emotional, or one that kind of goes into a child's well-being in the home environment as well, then you would be going through the GIRFEC process, where that would be picked up, and I'll come back onto that in a wee minute. And yeah, because all children need the same things to thrive: a stable home, strong support, steady loving relationships. For children who haven't always had this, there's a presumption that they will need additional support to achieve that same level of security, I think. So they should be part of the Getting It Right for Every Child system, that GIRFEC system. They should have regular planning meetings and be part of an assessment of need that would look at what does that child need overall, what do they need to be successful in their schoolwork, what do they need to be successful in themselves as a person for their health and well-being. And if you don't have that kind of meeting in place, then I would be going in and asking someone in school if they could initiate that for you. The meetings also have, they're formal, they should have minutes, there's a structure to follow, so you look at the child's strengths, the concerns, what strategies school are using, and what actions you want to see coming from that meeting. So what more could be done to support the child? How are we going to do that? What's the plan? And because the meetings focus on the child and the child's current situation, that would include home, if there's a concern at home, as well as in school. And it should include everybody's view, so it should include your view, and most importantly, it should start with the child's view. The difficulty with those meetings, though, is time. They do use up a lot of time, and they gather a lot of people together. So some of those people, if you've got an educational psychologist, you've got the class teacher, you've got the support for learning teacher, you've got the parent, you've got lots of people who are there. Those people are likely to have multiple meetings in a day. So there will be lots of different action points coming from meetings that they've got to follow up on. And there isn't always extra time given for that. And I know sometimes as a parent, it can be really frustrating when you've got this 1 hour and there is so much that you want to say and you want to cover. And it's really frustrating when at the end of the hour, that's it, your meeting's over. So I suppose we have to be as effective as we can with the time that we've got, but also keep in mind that that's not where the support ends for your child at the end of that meeting. There will be actions that come from that meeting where teachers will have to talk to one another, where referrals will have to be made, where actions should be followed up on. So the support will be ongoing, but you might not be part of that whole process until you meet again. But people will be working behind the scenes. And I think the follow the process part, for people who come up with a lack of support in school, I think the biggest piece of advice is to make sure you follow that process. So you're in the GIRFIC process, you follow the structure of that, and then we'll come to much later on what you might do if you reach the point maybe where you do want to complain about something. But following the process. So planning formats, we often talk about this in terms of additional support as well. Loads of children need additional support at some point in their school journey, and it usually involves planning to make sure that the type of support is right, and there are lots of different types of support plans. Personal learning planning is something for all children and young people, regardless of whether or not they've got additional support needs. Everybody has a personal learning plan, and different schools have different approaches and formats. At a pupil progress meeting, sometimes called a parents' consultation, you would probably discuss what your child is learning, what evidence of achievements and progress look like, and what's the plan for the next step in your child's learning. So that would be your personal learning planning. You're involved in that, your child's learning. And quite possibly at a meeting like that, as you're talking with the class teacher, something might come up, and it indicates that there's maybe an additional support need. And from that meeting, the class teacher might come and chat with the support for learning teacher, or initiate a piece of support from that meeting, or you might bring it up and the class teacher or school have to follow up on it. All local authorities use something called a staged intervention to identify the level of support a child needs to meet their learning needs. So staged intervention models tend to vary from one local authority to another. So there could be anywhere between 3 and 5 stages. At each stage, a child's progress is reviewed, and if it becomes apparent that the child needs more support, then they kind of keep escalating up to different levels. So stage 1 would be in-class support with the class teacher. The class teacher is providing all the additional support. Stage 2 might be that somebody else from school gets involved in providing that support. So there is a nurture teacher or a support for learning teacher or a pupil assistant who feed into the learning programme for your child. Stage 3 might be that a partner agency is involved. So you've got speech and language, or you've got a physiotherapist that comes in and works with your child. Stage 4 might be some kind of alternative provision that's involved in the learning programme for your child. And stage 5 might be that the mainstream setting's not quite right and you're looking at a special school type of environment for your child. So you've got the different levels. Within the Getting It Right for Every Child approach and meeting, you would have something called a child's plan. So all schools will be using the GIRFIC approach. You work together to generate a support plan for your child. The meetings tend to form a plan. The minutes, sorry, form a plan. Additional support plans, some schools will use this to record the adjustments and supports and interventions that are in place to help your child progress. So it might be a record of how the teacher uses particular language in a particular way or a particular strategy, but the child can still access the same learning as everybody else in the class and is making progress, but they maybe just need a little adjustment. So it might be that they have headphones on to dull the noise in the classroom, or you would do extra preparation for a trip. You might use some social stories, but the child is more than capable of you know, progressing with the attainment through Curriculum for Excellence. An IEP, an Individual Education Plan, is a written document that outlines the steps to be taken to help a child or young person with additional support needs achieve specific learning outcomes. Often, this is where a child's at a different level of learning completely to the rest of the class for something. So the programme maybe goes beyond class differentiation. So maybe you've got a child in primary 7 who's still working on quite early level or first level literacy, and you might have an IEP in place for the child at that point. And to kind of put that in context, in my school, we've probably got about 550 children. Very few of them, less than 10, would have an IEP, would have an individual education plan, but many of them will have a different sort of plan in place. It's not that they don't have a plan. Coordinated support plans are statutory plans that are used to identify and ensure provision of services for children and young people with complex or multiple additional support needs. But the criteria for these plans are really quite strict. So in order to qualify for a CSP, the child's needs need to have a significant negative effect on their school education and are likely to last for more than a year. And they need support from a local authority and at least one other non-education service or agency. So you would need speech and language or educational psychologist or another service involved or social services involved in order to meet the criteria. And the problem that I often have is that only people providing support are education-based people, so we don't quite meet the CSP criteria. And Enquire is the place to go if you would like to find more information about each of those things. I like to keep this in mind, that learning is for life. Some children have been through a lot in their lives and have got really busy brains and nervous systems. They are progressing through learning and they're being judged alongside peers who've got no barriers to learning and whose life experiences might have been uneventful. So your child might benefit from a bit flexibility in timescales and approaches, but you can still keep your expectations high for what they can achieve, and you can still have a positive destination. And I really don't like that phrase, but a positive destination in mind for them, but it might not be at the same timescale as everybody else. And that, for me, that's why support is available up to the age of 26 for a reason. There is no wrong path. So this was something that came up in a conversation or a group like this that I had before, where it was all adoptive parents that had come along, and the list that I drew up kind of came out of the conversation from them. It was, what did they want teachers to know really and understand, and what kind of things might help. So the list that is down here is kind of a list of things that the good practice things that I've tipped up from courses I've been to on the impact of trauma, but there are also things that I've seen in schools that are, I would say, reasonable adjustments that are in place that have kind of worked, and they've helped a particular child. It's not, the list isn't a kind of toolkit, it's not an explanation of anything. And I created it thinking about teachers in mind, teachers and parents, and the idea that you would maybe have this list in front of you that you could kind of scan down and go, well, we've got that in place, we've done that, we've done that, we've done that. But if your child is having difficulties with school, you would then maybe have a wee look down and see if there was a solution that you could try, basically, because you wouldn't do all of them. Not all of them would be relevant to your particular child, and maybe something that's there wouldn't work for your child. But it was more to give you an idea of what might be in place, and also to give the teacher an idea. So, you know, for example, for that first bit, it says read the child's education file at the top. We know, you know, if we want to be trauma informed, we kind of have to have an understanding about what's happened to a child. If somebody just says to you, oh, my child's, you know, had trauma in their life, it means nothing. Not unless you know a little bit about um, what they might have experienced. So, for example, if you know that a child has seen some violence, then maybe there are violent triggers or violent words that might crop up somewhere that become triggers for your child. Or if there was, you know, somebody with an Irish accent and red hair that was involved in the traumatic experiences for your child, and there's somebody with red hair on staff, then that's a trigger that could have been avoided if somebody perhaps had read that file. It's not necessarily the nitty-gritty part of it, but it's having some understanding of what's happened to the child beyond, oh yeah, they've suffered trauma in their life. We need to be mindful. What else? So again, you know, if a teacher wanted more information, you could direct them to the Let's Learn Together booklet, which has got a lot more information about the why a child might behave in a certain way and what you could do about it. But it's still pretty concise, I think. What else have we got? So things like transition supports. A lot of children struggle going from class to the playground and back again. And that's where maybe in the playground where they're on hyper alert, they've got friendship or communication processing isn't quite right, and they might get into a bit of trouble in the playground. So maybe things like having an early exit pass, if you like. So they go into the playground 2 minutes before everybody else when the corridors are empty. So it's a calmer time for them. Or when they come back into the classroom, they come straight into the classroom and they go to a particular area and they do a particular job or a particular activity. And they do that each time they come in to help them regulate. Just really simple things, or, you know, things like carrying something that heavy pressure is a good way to kind of regulate your body. So it might be that they pick something up when they come in through the door in the morning that they take to class, and that's a distraction from any kind of anxiety. Just so little things, and things like, you know, feeling safe. Again, we know that safety is a really big thing in school, and maybe relates to what you were saying, Karen, that your child needs to have that person that they connect with when they come through the door. So somebody that's an identified person that claps eyes on your child in the morning and says, hi, how was your day? It was so lovely to see you. But they've created some sort of connection to help your child feel safe. And there are other little things that they can do, like ask them about seating and what their preferred seating is in a class. What else have we got? All the different types of planning that you might do. For teachers, there's something called a Boxhall profile, which is an assessment of social and emotional development. So a teacher can kind of, or you could look at all these different statements, and you kind of give them a rating out of 4, I think, and then it will give you an indication of where your child's development lies in relation to their peers. And then it will maybe give you some suggestions of activities that you might do that would help close developmental gaps. And again, a list of care experience support. So for teachers, and also for you to know that there are different places that you can access support. Clearly it is heavily dependent on Adoption UK, but there's also the virtual school team, and social services or post-adoption support. And, you know, I suppose maybe here I could have put things like CAMHS as well. I hadn't thought about that. There are helplines that you can phone up. There's helplines for speech and language or helplines for occupational therapy, where you can get a little bit of advice from specialists, even before you've kind of gone down that referral route. I was just going to, again, I can't emphasize enough about the fact that we have to work within the GIRFIC policy and the procedures in order to keep moving through the stages of intervention. So if school isn't providing the right environment or the right support for your child, and you need more. So for example, if your child's in school for 2 days, 2 hours a day, that's not enough. You're looking for more support. So you're going back to what is the GIRFIC policy? What's the procedure? What's the next stage? What's the next level that we do together? And I think if you can try and get people on side so that you're pushing through the procedures on the same side. It's not that you're saying schools at fault because they're not meeting the need or managing. You're recognising that there's lots of practical issues that are in the way. So you're a team and you're doing it together. So that would be kind of one of the things to think about. The flexibility and creativity. I think often our children's needs don't fit neatly into a box or a system. We know that all children need a stable environment, strong support and a steady caring relationship in school. If we don't provide that, and even sometimes when we do, you still see trigger responses. And trauma responses don't fit within social norms. So we need to apply creative thinking and flexibility to the solutions that we put into place, and the more knowledge about trauma and brain development we have, the more likely we are to be able to find the right kind of solution for our children. But we do need to be flexible and creative in how we do that. We're looking for somebody in school who can join us in that flexibility and creativity. Schools are being given the message that relationships matter all the time. So they know that. And if we can stay focused on people in our supports, rather than the system, that will be really helpful. If we get that right support, then the children will do well in school. They'll have better mental health. They'll have opportunities to thrive. And every child deserves that. So follow the GIRFIC process, which is what local authorities should do. Follow that staged intervention approach. And if you think school are failing in their duty to provide adequate support, then look at the local authority policies, because ultimately it's the local authority that is responsible for providing the support rather than the school. And if the problems keep happening, the best place to go really is inquire, because the local authority's got the legal responsibility for making sure that your child's got the support that they need. Although I don't know if anybody is in that complicated position of you live in one local authority, or your child's in a different local authority school, or your child's still involved in the placement system somewhere. It maybe gets a wee bit more complicated. But most of the day-to-day responsibility for arranging and providing support for your child resides with the child's school or nursery. If your child needs more support or different support to what the school can provide, then your local authority is responsible for making sure that they get the help they need. And the local authority can ask other services like health or social work to get involved. By law, local authorities must identify, provide for and review the additional support needs of their pupils. And the Education Act of 2004 sets out the duties of the local authorities and the rights of parents and young people, but they don't specify how local authorities have to do that. And again, that goes back to that, reasonable asks that you have to make. First point of call, ask for a meeting to address your concerns. Very often speaking about your child's needs is really emotive. So the best tip would be to take somebody along with you who can help to advocate with you. They can be that neutral voice, they can take notes, they can prompt you if you forget something. And there's fact sheets on the website if you need them. And also use principles of non-violent resistance. Couple of suggestions from Haim Omar, who wrote a book called Courageous Parents. He makes several suggestions about how to nurture a relationship with school. It was a really interesting chapter in his book. Some of it didn't sit too well with me as a teacher. Some of it really made me think. The tone of it maybe was quite interesting, but a couple of suggestions that came out of that. An honest and respectful appeal for cooperation is what he suggests that we do as parents, that we are aware of how we use language so that we avoid implied criticism. And that's something I'm learning to do with my daughter, because every time I talk to her, she thinks I'm criticizing her at the moment. And I don't think I am. I think I'm just being helpful. He suggests, emphasizing the common interest that you have, that you're on the same team if we act together, recognizing when things are not hard when things are hard in a practical context for the teacher, but remembering that you're on the same side, you want the same thing, you want the best educational outcome for all children and particularly for your child. He talks about respecting the teacher's need to support the whole class and kind of framing it with, it's really important to help my child, but I recognise that you're taking account of everybody in the class. My child's just one. He talks about positive involvement. So at the first parent meeting, making clear your openness to knowing the good and the bad, the positive and the negative. He talks about honesty and be honest about the problems. And this bit was really interesting because he talked about often as a parent, protection can be our first point of call. And maybe that comes with a bit of implying that somebody else might be to blame if you're just protecting. So talks about opting for something neutral, like, we understand the difficulties, we're doing everything that we can to help, and that when we're open about the problems that we face too, that we recognise that we've both got problems, then we put out there that it's okay for teachers to talk about the problems that they have. And if there are communication problems, and that does happen, when you're angry, it's only natural to lay blame to to the other side, as it were. And if that happens, then you need to seek to repair that relationship, because you do need to be on the same team as school staff. If you want the best educational outcomes for your child, you do need to be working together. So if you get to a point where you've got a relationship with a teacher, something's happened, the relationship's ruptured, then you're looking for somebody to help you repair that, whether it's the head teacher, some kind of advocacy service or mediation service. And again, I really had to think about this part. As parents, our ultimate aim is to support our children rather than protect them. Support means that we are helping our child to build their skills. We're empowering them, I think somebody used that word earlier, to lead as full a life as they can. Whereas protecting them maybe can sometimes remove responsibility from them. Whereas support takes account of all of that background information and all of those things that but you're scaffolding their learning skills so that somehow or other they're getting stronger, if you like. So if you're being supportive, you're looking for a solution for the difficulties. And then accessing support outside of school, there's a range of services that you might be able to approach. There's health and social work or advocacy services. There are, and I didn't talk about this earlier, but I often bring extra support from outside of school into school through things like Children First or Bernardo's or MCR Pathways. There are often local organisations that will provide support for young people. They might offer art therapy or play therapy or counselling, or they might offer some kind of bespoke programme for a child, and they'll come and they'll work with your child for a short period of time, very often in school, and that can be a really good way of school staff increasing the support that's on offer for your child. And then there's also Adoption UK have a Pathways programme, which has just replaced TESA, the therapeutic parenting programme that we have, and post-adoption support can help as well. And then if you wanted to complain, again, Inquire is the best place to go. You follow the process, you tell school about your concerns, talk to the class teacher, put your concerns in writing, speak to the head teacher, contact the local authority, so you go through those different stages. And then you might, employ mediation for that. Local authority websites have got their policies and procedures on their websites. The ASN tribunal, if you get to a point where you disagree with decisions that are made about support plans, decisions about coordinated support plans, or you've been refused a placement request in a special school, or there's a disability discrimination, then you might go to the AS tribunal to support you. And then Govern Law also provides legal representation if there are disputes. So there are places that you can go to if you have complaints, and I'll send out all these slides. It's got different contact information.